So I just wanted to take a few minutes and kind of go over the SCALT actions based upon the letter and the information that was received from the State Department. So we're just going to take a few minutes to go over a little bit of the background. I am going to talk a little bit about the SCALT criteria, although I know some of you have done that wonderful, just wonderful module that the state has pushed out, was just great, I know. But we'll take a few minutes just to go over a few highlights. We do have some procedures, and then what are our next steps as we move forward. So as you know, the Office of Assessment, or OA, initiated a review of the district because the district had identified more than 1% of the population taking SCLs. Only 1% of our population is eligible to take SCL, and we had last year more than 1%. So what they did was Michael, I guess which is him, had submitted 33 records of students who are identified as taking the SCL. And here's basically what they found, was that out of those 33, 27 didn't follow the eligibility criteria for SCL. 27 records had adaptive scores above the criteria, which is 2.5 or 3 standard deviations below the mean. Oh, boy, this is horrible spelling. Or the record didn't include any adaptive scores at all. I'll fix that. And then 24 of the records didn't have deficits or goals in the IEP, which indicated a need for adaptive instruction or modifications. So, and because those instances that about not following the criteria were not specific to one school, the state considered it a systemic issue. So hence the reason why we're having to do all this, because it was really across the board. So when you're looking at eligibility for SCL, these things have to be met. So first of all, it's a significant disability, and that's characterized by those cognitive scores, both on verbal and nonverbal, that are 2.5 to 3 standard deviations below the mean. And Mitra, correct me if I'm wrong, that's probably, I'm thinking about a 55. Is that right? Mitra?
Yeah, that's real low. 2.5 to 3, yeah.
Yeah, so you're looking at kids, if you have kids with IQs or any score in the verbal or nonverbal above a 55, they automatically don't qualify to take SCLs. Okay? They must also possess current adaptive skills requiring extensive instruction. So, you know, they can't do those daily living skills. They can't really take care of themselves at all. So when you think of those type kiddos, quite honestly, you think of, I tend to think of the kids in Julie Bishop's class over at the high school, right? Those are those kinds of kiddos. They must be unable to apply or use academic skills across natural settings when instructed through classroom instruction. So basically nothing transfers. And they must access the state-approved curriculum at a less complex level. So they have to have extensive modification. They have to have all of this addressed in their IEP, adaptive, functional, all of that. So if it's not, the state is saying right from the get-go, they're not eligible for SCLs. So our first key is going to be those verbal and nonverbal. If any of those kids are above 2.5 or 3 standard deviations, we can't even consider them for SCLs. Does that make sense? So what does this mean? This is going to be our most severe and profound students in the district. It is not designed for students who are SLD. Students must have an intellectual disability, right? So we can't have a student that's speech and language disabled taking the SCLs. They could have a primary of OHI, OI, or even autism as well, but they have to have that cognitive disability. So like I said, the IEP must reflect, they have to have short-term objectives, clear and concise present levels. They're taking alternative assessments across the board, even at district. They're focusing on adaptive and daily living skills. We're looking at our progress monitoring data, and their post-school or post-secondary has to include daily living skills as well. So they're being really, the criteria is very difficult. So what did I have to do? So I had to develop some new procedures for Anderson 4 for SCLs and submit them to the state. I've done that. I'm just waiting for approval. But basically, here's what I've said. When we have a student who's being considered for SCL, these following people must be at the meeting. So your special ed, general ed, parent, guardian, student, your school administrator, I have to be at the meeting, one of our psychologists, any other providers, OT, PT, speech, and if appropriate, an instructional coach, depending on how involved they are. So those people, at least the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are non-negotiables. Those people must be at those meetings. During the meeting, we're going to look at the alternative eligibility criteria worksheet. We'll go over that. And you can give that to Mitra or Winjun prior to the meeting, and they can help fill out that information. And then also at the meeting, we're going to do the review of eligibility for alternative assessment. It's a checklist that you fill out. Part of the reason we're going to do that is because it will help explain to parents, maybe for some of their students who have been eligible for SCALT who are no longer going to meet that eligibility. Here's the reason why. Okay. So if a student doesn't meet that eligibility after reviewing everything, then the student may not be eligible to participate in SCALT. So again, once the procedures are approved by the state, I'll post them on the support site. And just remember, if we're doing an SCALT for a child, even in 3rd or 4th grade, we're basically saying, hey, your kid's not going to get a high school diploma. We're kind of sealing their track from the get-go. So what happens? So here are all the things that we've done, the policies and procedures. You guys are doing that wonderful professional learning opportunity. And now we're starting to schedule meetings. So I will send you the principals, the list. I think I have, but I'll send it out again of all the meetings that need to be held. So we need to hold 28 IEP meetings and reevaluation meetings. Now that does not mean that we're going to actually formally test. We're not going to put poor Mitra and Winjun into testing shock. We may not have to test all of the kids, but we have to look at all of the information for those kids who are identified as SCALT and determine if they truly meet that eligibility based on this information. If we don't have any of this information, so if we don't have recent cognitive scores or recent adaptive scores, we may have to do some gathering of data and then come back and make the determination for eligibility. Okay. Once that's done for the reeval, then I have to submit all that to the state. So if this is, let's see, open link in new window. Can you guys see that? Is it showing it to you? Okay. So you can see this takes you right to the support site, but here is the SCALT. And close your eyes for a minute because I'm gonna scroll down a little fast. I don't want to give anybody like a heart attack, or I know this always annoys me when people do that, but sorry, I'm gonna be one of those people. So the initial determination, this is one of those things that we're gonna fill out. And this is something we can, this would be something we can get to Mitra or Winjun before. It wants to know, they want to know all of these scores on these kids. So in an adaptive skill, we need parent input too. So as Mitra or Winjun looks through this, if we don't have any adaptive evaluations, but they're only from the school, they want it from the parents as well. So that's where we may have to gather some more information. And then it's asking for all of these reading, math, written expression. So all this is asking about MAP, district alternative assessment, reading assessment. So they want to know everything. So we got to fill this out on each of our kids. Yes, Jeffrey.
On the parent ratings, I've been through several evaluations where the parents don't tell the truth. Based on what we see at school, there's no way they have those adaptive skills at home. So how would that be considered when we make decisions? Because I've been in meetings before where we basically say we're accepting what the teacher says over the parents, but when we have this kind of corrective action from the state, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page on how that's going to work.
Yeah, so the process is still the same. And Misha, if you want to talk a little bit when we're looking at adaptive, what are we looking at? I mean, we need the information from the parent, but it's not going to be the final determining factor, right, Misha?
I guess it really depends. I guess who your school psychologist is. But I do know that the assessments I would give, they give a standard score. But I don't know. I mean, I think we do need to keep in there. That's the problem. That's the bad thing about adaptive is that sometimes the ones that you're assessing for an intellectual disability, it's also in the environment as well, which is hard to do that assessment.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because I
Yeah.
understand. I mean, I understand, and what basically kind of what we've done is if the school psych rates them low and the teacher rates them low, then and the parents just totally off the, the scale, we've just gone 2 out of 3 basically.
Yeah.
So I just was wanting us to be consistent across the board with that, and I wouldn't make a big deal out of it if it weren't state wasn't involved.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah, and I think
what
we
does-
can still, I think we can still do that, Jeffrey. It's just gonna be situation by situation. And we'll just note, I mean, in the report, it would be noted, like Mitra or Wenju, and I'm assuming would note that the difference in the discrepancy between what they're seeing at school, what they're seeing at home. For those parents too, maybe that you guys know these parents better. So maybe maybe for that, we have them come in and Mitra and Wenjun kind of give it to them one-on-one or Zoom wise, you know what I mean? Like talk them through it.
That's
As
what we've
opposed to
done in
just-
the past.
Yeah.
That's helped.
Yeah, as opposed to just sending it home. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So then the other thing at the meetings we'll actually do and complete is we'll fill this review of eligibility. So it's just a checklist, and it will help us determine yes or no. And again, this is also if we have parents who get upset that now all of a sudden that their student is not taking it or, still meets it. This is kind of our checklist from the state in terms of why they're not meeting the eligibility, or yes, they are meeting the eligibility. And then everybody at the meeting signs it. So we have to do all this because I have to turn them into the state. Okay, so here's the kicker. So if we as a team determine that the student does not meet the criteria, we must then determine as a team whether the district's failure to provide access to the general education assessment was a denial of FAPE. So we have to determine, because the students technically were not eligible for SCALT, we didn't have them in the general ed, or when I say provide access, it doesn't mean they're sitting in a general ed. We haven't provided them the content and the instruction of those standards. If it has, if it's considered a denial of FAPE, if the team determines it was, then we owe compensatory services for those kids. If it's not, then we don't owe compensatory services, but we still have to have that discussion about what, did we not provide a free appropriate public education because we had them on this wrong track. So in the meetings, we'll have those conversations. The prior written notice must document that. I will help you all with that. I will, as we're meeting, I'll do some of those PWNs. You won't submit anything or finalize anything till I've taken a final look at it, but I will help with that part. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. Don't get too worried about the PWN. I'll be in there and be able to do some of that just to make sure it says everything we need it for them to say. Okay, so as you guys are scheduling your annual reviews for these kids, we need to address these issues. So Crystal has a list she's keeping track of, and when we have annuals, I think we have 2 this week, or at least 1 this week over at La France. So we're already starting to address these. We do need to hold these IEPs before testing time because we need to look at SCALT. So once you get the list, if you have kids and their IEPs aren't due till like May or whatever, we need to push that up because we got to have it before testing actually starts to make these determinations. Okay. You guys are going to set up the meetings and amendments. Make sure you include all of us, but include Crystal. She's not going to come to these meetings, but again, she's going to help us keep track of everything to make sure we get them done. Any questions? Oh, Jeffrey, you have your hand raised again.
Me again. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I've only had the intellectually disabled moderate class in my school, so I've never had to worry about SC Ready or SC Alt. So sorry for the questions.
No, you're fine.
What happens if we meet and we are still over the 1%? In other words, we see that the students really do need to be in SC Alt instead of SC Ready, and we are over the 1% again. Are we going to do this every year?
We'll continue on corrective actions until we get below 1%. Yeah.
And which would mean that we would have to put students back in Gen Ed with potentially an IQ of 65.
It doesn't necessarily mean we have to put them in general ed. It means we have to expose them to the content and the standards, right? So don't think it means we have to all of a sudden take all these kids and throw them in a general education classroom, because that's not what's appropriate either. It means we have to start looking at, and I've kind of talked with Haley about this, and I'll work with the teachers on what is that going to look like in terms of instruction, right? We have to expose these kids to science and social studies vocabulary and terms and things like that. And it, we have to get them involved in it. We have to look, there's priority standards we can look at. It doesn't mean that they're going to have to just go right into general ed and be able to be masters of that curriculum. Because I'm with you. That's not a reality. That's not what's going to happen. But we've got to expose them to it and get them at least some knowledge of the standards and stuff. This is a catch-22. It really is, because it is going to impact your test scores if these kids are taking the general assessment, because we know even with a 65, 70 IQ, these kids are going to struggle taking a general assessment. But the state is very clear on who takes this alternative assessment. And as you see, they are not budging.
And how does that work towards counting towards schools? So for example, if I don't think I do, like Mount Lebanon or Townville students that are in our schools, do those test scores count for their schools or for mine?
I think they would count on yours because your school is served. That would be a good question. I'd have to find out.
They're on ours, Jeffrey.
Okay.
Whatever school is serving them, that's where they are. So then more, that goes back to what we've discussed before then, that about making sure that our kids are all served in their home schools. Because I'll just be very honest. I have them all here, and that's, we love them and we don't want them to go anywhere, but at the same time, that's a lot of scores going on one school's report card when I'm serving everyone else's students. They're ours. Hear me say they're ours, because I had to keep Haley from having a mental breakdown about sending some of them to another school because they're our babies. But at the same time,